demonstration, and in the crowd you had some firefighters, some police. So that's what it is. The only one that wasn't involved, it appears like, is the judiciary. So good for the judiciary. But yeah, it's looking like this is an actual attempted coup. I think insurrection isn't a strong enough word.
Yeah, me either.
So.
All right, Vivian, next up, Fredericksburg, Virginia, Democrats line. What were the founders saying?
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Bill. Good morning, C-SPAN. Well, they probably are rolling over in the grave, and I bet you there's some tears coming out the eyes at the Mount Rushmore. But Bill, I've been noticing you allow people to lie, and you allow them to lie longer. But Democrats, you cut off. And the guy from Mississippi, no, I don't have a problem with Mexicans, because you know what? I'm doing good, and I'm black. You know, I made my way. My parents made us make our way. They made us go to school. They made us make an earning. But Trump is a lie. The media helped him lie. They never challenged his lies. And this is what happened. This man has destroyed our country. I mean, we got almost 400,000 people dead, over almost 3 million sick. How many unemployed? 12 million. How many small business that failed? Come on. And he wants to be president again? Come on. He should want to run from it.
Today marks the 35th observance of the federal holiday, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, across the country. This is David Vondrelli in the Washington Post, an opinion piece, The Force of Nonviolence. And he writes that the January 6th riot in Washington, and it must be said, the window smashing and arson of summer, reflects a belief that civil protest and public persuasion are not enough to get the job done, however poorly that job may be defined. The problem with escalation is it has no logical end. If violence is more sincere than nonviolence, it follows that greater violence is even more sincere. But he writes, where does nonviolence get its force? If not from pain, fear, and intimidation? King replied in 3 steps. Nonviolent resistance does not seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win his friendship and understanding. He wrote, this is possible because nonviolence is directed at changing conditions rather than individuals, or as he puts it, quote, forces of evil rather than persons who are caught in those forces. Logical escalation to violence does, quote, nothing but intensify the hate in the world, while at the center of nonviolence stands the principles of love. King was making the crucial point, writes David Vondrelli, that nonviolence is not merely the absence of violence. It is the expression of a person's inmost self, one's attitude toward the opposition or even the enemy. To those who say, as many do, that nonviolence doesn't work, or that it won't work against this or that set of evil foes, King suggested more love is the expression of sincerity, not violence. Unlike violence, love can be escalated endlessly with no harm done. And kind of reflecting some of that, this is Congressman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts tweeting this morning about the holiday. He says, Dr. Martin Luther King said, quote, I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right temporarily defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. Let us honor his words with action, from Congressman Jim McGovern. And our Capitol documentary also explores in it the role of slave labor in building the Capitol.
The irony is, it was slave labor, for the most part, that built this temple for freedom.
Freedom for some was predicated on enslavement of others. The Capitol was, in fact, constructed by enslaved laborers, as well as free blacks. I wonder what they thought of laboring at the Capitol and building this structure that was going to house the Senate and the House and our representative government. And I can't imagine working under those conditions and not being free myself.
It says something terrible that free men raising a symbol of freedom that's built by slaves.
My favorite part of the Capitol is on the Senate side, the last original part of the Capitol, where you can see some of the original sandstone, the huge blocks that were laid by enslaved laborers. Because it's original, it hasn't been touched, and it's something you can actually see and gives you a dramatic view of what enslaved laborers, the type of labor they did. Those blocks are so huge, and I can't imagine having to lift those using simple machines. It must have been difficult, wrenching labor.
Part of our 2006 documentary, The Capitol There, airing at 1 p.m. and 8 p.m. today, and images of the attack on January 6th. As we continue with our conversation about what the founders would think of the Republic, Robert's in Henderson, Kentucky. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for taking my call. My comment is that the founding fathers would probably be happy, considering that they were hypocrites. They were fleeing from England from the oppression of the king, and they came to the colonies, and they had enslaved people with them. And so the hypocrisy is forever sewn into the fabric of America. And what Donald Trump did was he tapped into that hatred. And so the founding fathers would probably be impressed because the document itself is flawed, and so is the whole concept, because you can't advocate for freedom from the king, and at the same time you are reducing human beings to the level of an animal and then writing laws that did the same. And so Donald Trump tapped into the ugly hatred of America that has ever been present and is sewn into the fabric of America. And the only way it's going to be removed is when you teach those who hate you that they are themselves an extension of the black man himself, because he is the father of all civilization. Thank you so very much, and have a blessed day.
To Brett, next up in Lafayette, Louisiana, Republican line.
Yeah, I just want to comment two things. The Trump supporters seem to be, even if they are a Trump supporter and disagree with what's going on with the Democrats, they are tarnished as a Trump supporter. The other thing I wanted to mention about, since we're talking about slavery, if you go back to when the Spanish gave land to the people in along the Mississippi River on the east side, there was one guy that came from Mississippi, one 23-year-old guy with 750 slaves. I never knew that until I had a tour of that plantation, and since I heard that, it puts a different perspective on slavery that I think a lot of people have no idea, realize nothing about it. That's all I want to comment on.
All right, thanks for sharing that, Brett. To Trona, California, Harold is on the independent line. Trona, California, go ahead.
Hello. Good morning. Yeah, I would say if I was a founding father, I would say, why are you still paying taxes? The Congress, the Senate, is not doing anything for the people, and why do we support them? They need to step up to the plate and start working for the people. That, it's a sad thing that's going on. And the gentleman from Mississippi had a good point. Thank you.
Okay, 202-748-8000 is the line for Democrats. 202-748-8001 for Republicans, Independents, and others. 202-748-8002. About a half an hour left of our opening conversation on what the founders would think of our republic. And again, we're doing this in part because we'll be airing our Capitol documentary, our 2006 documentary, today at 1 p.m. and at 8 p.m. Eastern as well. Give you a look here next at some of the paintings in the rotunda of James Madison, the James Madison shows. Let's take a look.
The discussion really comes to whether or not Congress would buy the paintings that John Trumbull has been trying to sell the government for some time, the great paintings showing the events of the American Revolution. And when Congress in 1817 appropriates the money to commission Trumbull for 4 of his great American Revolutionary War scenes, that the function of the rotunda as a memorial to the American Revolution is sanctified. And these 4 great paintings are commissioned specifically for the room. They're not just bought by Congress with the idea that some will go on the House side, some will go on the Senate side. No, they are intended for the rotunda. And in conversations with the president, James Madison decides that the figure shall be life-size. The events to be commemorated would be the Declaration of Independence, the surrender of Burgoyne at Saratoga, the surrender of Cornwallis at Yorktown, and finally, and interestingly, Washington resigning his commission. And that was James Madison's idea, that painting would conclude this series. Some had thought maybe Bunker Hill or another military engagement, but no. James Madison said it was such a magnificent event when Washington resigned his military commission, returning military authority back to the civil authority which had granted it in the first place. He said it was such an act of selflessness and just a heroic act that this really must be remembered as an event just as great as the beginning of the war, the turning point of the war, and the conclusion of the war.
With the theme of independence from Great Britain providing the backdrop, the first ceremony ever held in the Rotunda took place in 1820.
And you can see that painting in the background, the resignation of George Washington resigning his commission. And that, of course, the images there from January the 6th. 2027-488-8000, our line for Democrats, 2027-488-8001, Republicans and all others, 2027-488-8002. What would the founders think of our republic? A couple of comments on text and by Twitter. This is Michael in Portland, who says, being men of their times, they would be more horrified by the ravages of factionalism, the rise of populist mass movements, the election of unscrupulous men to the presidency, the failure of an educated elite to retain power. They would consider their plans and hopes in wreckage. A tweet says they would say we need to do a lot better about educating the electorate. People are too easily led by their passions and not reason. The founding fathers would be in amazement at the scope of citizenry they could have not fathomed. Women, Native Americans, poor men, immigrants, blacks, and non-Christians having access to voting. And they would foam at the mouth over the recent insurrection as an aberration. And Bruce says this, they'd be shocked a black man can vote, let alone held the presidency, and probably pleased no one talks about our founding mothers. To Central Islip, New York. Jim? Go ahead. Republican line.
Yeah, hi.
Morning.
I think they'd be surprised. At how our government doesn't seem to be protecting us. You see how fast that fence went up around the Capitol? You see how fast that happened? And we can't get them to protect us at the border? We got to fight for that. Well, that's why we voted for Trump. The rug has been pulled out from underneath the working people of this country, and I don't hear anybody saying anything. Nobody noticed that this fence went up immediately. And we've been saying that this country is being invaded by people who are not assimilating. They're taking our jobs. I can tell you, I live here in CI. You have a lot of elites on this program all the time, but you never have the working people. They don't live here. They wouldn't live here. This town has gone to hell. This is happening across the country in little pockets. And they're not protecting us.
News from Reuters about a potential conflict at the border. We're starving. U.S.-bound migrant caravan hunkers down after Guatemala crackdown. Hundreds of Honduran migrants huddled overnight on a highway in eastern Guatemala after domestic security forces used sticks and tear gas to halt the passage of the U.S.-bound caravan just days before U.S. President-elect Joe Biden takes office. Reuters writes that as many as 8,000 migrants, including families with young children, have entered Guatemala since Friday, authorities say, fleeing poverty and lawlessness in a region rocked by the coronavirus pandemic and back-to-back hurricanes in November. Quote, there's no food or water, and there are thousands of children, pregnant women, babies, and they don't want to let us pass, said a Honduran stuck at the blockade who gave his name only as Pedro. In Long Island, New York, let's hear from Troy, Democrats line.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, sir. the things are to be rolling over in their graves right now. And I'm not far from Seattle. That's totally wrong. I work for a company called Innovation TV on Facebook.com/Innovation TV.
You know, you're breaking up a little bit, Troy. Sorry about that. Your phone was just breaking up too much. Decatur, Georgia. Gar in Decatur, Georgia. Go ahead.
Happy Martin Luther King Day to all Americans and a man of peace, love, and nonviolence. I like to quote James Madison, who once said, a country continue war, a country is always at war, cannot maintain its freedoms. And we spend more money on the military than the next 10 countries combined. And they would also say, no wonder we've been in debt since 1836. USA been in debt since 1836. That's what the founding fathers would be saying. And Thomas Jefferson, what did he say? He feared bankers more than he did standing armies. So that's what the founding fathers would be saying. Thank you.
On Martin Luther King Day, New York Times with a video opinion piece from his son, Martin Luther King III, quote, my father, Martin Luther King Jr., had another dream. If he saw the issues of poverty and income inequality that exist today, he would be greatly disappointed. Watch that video at nytimes.com. In Feeding Hills, Massachusetts, William, good morning.
Hey, good morning. I think our founding fathers would be a little upset that in 1929 the House of Representatives capped the membership at 435, kind of ending our representative republic, because since 1929, we now have a growing number of representatives. I mean, the growing number of constituents for representatives, so some represent a million people. We'd have over 2,000 House representatives today if it was uncapped. But as it grew, we would have, the number would lessen. We'd have like 960 today. It would be harder to have 40-year congressmen. It would be harder to impeach a president based on party lines, because as you grow the House of Representatives, the districts would change, which would make it harder for the incumbent to keep a 40-year, 50-year seat. Do you agree?
Are you talking about the Republicans?
Patricia in,
great.
I'm gonna get this right. Huacha City, Arizona.
Yes, Huachuca, Arizona.
Okay. Good morning.
Huachuca City. Good morning. I just wanted to say, after the 6th, and once it was clear that chaos started at the rally, and it was sitting at Pennsylvania Avenue, and what happened, threats had been made, cabinet members, Pence should have been made to invoke the 25th. And if it did not get done then on the 7th, 8th, by the 9th, it was very clear. They wanted him, Pence, dead. It was clear that Speaker of the House Pelosi would have been executed. Pence had a duty not only to his fellow congressmen, but to us, the people that voted me. That's the only time I ever voted Republican, was for him, Trump and Pence. He had a duty to us to remove Trump. Insurrectionists overran every policeman, police barrier, doors, windows with not very much opposition. Police officers had to stand by and watch. One had to talk, take a 19-year-old young lady's life. Her mother said she was the type of girl that would die for her beliefs. I would like to ask her, what did her 19-year-old believe in so strongly after only 2 years of adulthood? Because she's dead, so she can no longer give her voice for her precious, immature beliefs. And if her mother has those same beliefs, Pence had a duty to the Constitution to protect it, us, its people, from these exact actions. He failed. So now Trump's had 7 days and is making heroes out of the insurrectionists. And every citizen of this country that was there was thousands of people there. Every citizen of this country was failed by his not being removed. People that stormed the Capitol, and they succeeded because of one reason: the element of surprise and the failure of all that hold office in that Capitol building to stop Trump. Planning for this started as early as December 21st, if not earlier.
She's ignorant.
2012, 21, 20.
Okay, Patricia in Arizona mentioned the role of the vice president, critical of the vice president. C-SPAN's Howard Morton tweeting this, an image from the vice president returning. Per Brian Stelter of CNN, Vice President Pence landed back in D.C. Sunday night after his final official trip in office. Per the press pool, he stepped off Air Force Two and, quote, paused for a minute to look around and take it all in. Here's the picture with his family out at Joint Base Andrews.
Because he's not going to
In
get there
East
again.
Meadow, New York, Republican line. Nick, good morning.
Yes, hi. I think that the founders would be turning in their grave right now. They set this country up so that everybody who works for the government raises their hand, takes an oath of office to uphold the Constitution. When you get into what Nancy Pelosi and her band of thugs are doing, they're not doing the job of what the oath of office. They are actually
People have such a limited mindset. They don't know. They've never been in Congress, so they have no idea. But then they've been bamboozled.
And
so true.
It's breaking up our country.
Broken.
We are in total disarray.
Broken
because
already.
Of Nancy Pelosi.
No. I disagree.
The Democrats are
Why don't
not
you
the
cut him
Democrats
off?
that they were.
You just let these people
when
ramble
John Kennedy was around.
ignorance. You cut other people off.
You know, it's
No,
just not
I don't know.
working out the
It
way
didn't work
everybody is running the country. One thing that we are doing right now is we're allowing colonization of our country with China and Russia.
Are you sick?
This is what's going on.
Well,
It's
if
been
that's going on, it's because Trump made it happen.
For about 20, 30 years. People have not really looked into this. But if you take a look and analyze, the Chinese will own us very, very shortly.
They already
Nancy
do.
Pelosi, Manu Raju of CNN, tweeting this morning, saying that in a new criminal court case against a woman alleged to have entered the Capitol on January 6th, the FBI says a tipster raised the possibility of a laptop being stolen from Speaker Pelosi's office to potentially sell to Russia.
They're going
Come
to
to
prison.
California. Good morning to Eric
They can track
on
that
our
laptop.
Democrats line.
Good morning, America. This is a sad day for America. But I like to reflect on our history. 100 years ago, we watched, I can't say we watched, but we know the story of Tulsa. Tulsa, Oklahoma was a sovereign nation. And we see the same people today that attacked Tulsa.
Amen.
That these are the same grandchildren of the people that attacked Tulsa that went into the White House.
Ballistic.
We have to remember, I mean, not the White House, the Capitol. We have to remember Adolf Hitler was following the American Ku Klux Klan. After they saw what the fascists was doing in America to the blacks here and the people of color in America, they felt they had the same right to do the same thing to the Jews over in Europe because they lost the war. America's fashion was upset because the colored people helped them win World War I. So again, this is nothing new for the people of color. Tulsa was a sovereign nation. Tulsa, Oklahoma is a sovereign nation, capital, like the capital of the United States for the Cherokee people. And they disregarded that. They didn't have no respect then. They don't have respect today. They wouldn't use the lie about communism and socialism. It's just straight racism. And everybody knows this.
And Eric, appreciate that. And for those of you who are further interested in what he's talking about, the Tulsa Massacre, we did programs on that last year in 2020. You can find that at cspan.org. Search cspan.org. Asking you this morning what the founders would think of the Republic. 202-748-8000 for Democrats. Republicans, it's 202-748-8001. And for all others, 202-748-8002. From The Atlantic, the headline on this piece about pardons, Trump's pardon of Manafort, Paul Manafort, is the realization of the founders' fears, is the headline. In the article, they write this. Back in 1787, when the Constitutional Convention was drafting part of the Constitution that would soon become the presidential pardon power, George Mason unequivocally opposed the provision. The president, he said, quote, ought not to have the power of pardoning, because he may frequently pardon crimes which were advised by himself. It may happen at some future day, and he will establish a monarchy and destroy the republic if he has the power of granting pardons before indictment or conviction. May he not stop inquiry and prevent detection. Obviously, they write Mason never met Donald Trump, but clearly he had someone like Trump in mind. Trump's pardon of Paul Manafort and Roger Stone, especially when added to his pardons of Michael Flynn, is of exactly the sort Mason feared. Asking you the question this morning about the founders in advance of our re-airing today of our Capitol documentary from 2006. A look here at the construction of the Rotunda and the Capitol Dome.
Seeing the dome under construction by the tens of thousands of Union soldiers who marched through Washington facing an uncertain future certainly gave them, instilled in them a sense of the continuation of the country. It was a symbol that was not lost on many, that great white dome rising slowly above the Capitol was a potent symbol of the future of a united country, was seen as a sign of the successful outcome of the Civil War, reuniting a country that had been torn asunder over the issue of slavery.
On top of this symbol of unity stands the Statue of Freedom, authorized before the war began, but put atop the dome in December of 1863, while the war still raged on.
The most interesting part of my research thus far has been the Statue of Freedom, which was cast in bronze by an enslaved laborer named Philip Reed. I think this is interesting because it's so ironic that this Statue of Freedom was cast by an enslaved person who was free by the time she was raised atop the Capitol, because emancipation came to Washington on April 16th, 1862. So Philip Reed had been free for over a year when she was raised atop the Capitol.
And our documentary airs again tonight today at 1 p.m. and also tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, as we look at a more recent photo in the past week or so with National Guard troops now surrounding the U.S. Capitol. Comments on Twitter about our question this morning. This one says the founders would be disappointed that the very institutions they created to prevent a person like Trump have been challenged to the core. They'd recommend significant changes to bolster our electoral and justice systems. They would certainly strengthen congressional oversight. Our founders knew the day would come when the people would need to stand up to a tyrannical government and gave us the right to do so, says John from San Antonio, Texas. It's good that an arcane 18th century artifact is heading to the dustbin of history. The founders would have understood that political thought and the government it informs have to advance with the decades. We've stuck in the ditch for many years now. Reality is the best antidote for societal lethargy, says Harry in Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Margaret in Ellicott City, Maryland. The founders were imperfect, writing the Constitution for white men. I would believe most were beholden to slave labor and inherent supremacy. Therefore, they might be quiet sympathizers of Trumpism. This one says, I think the founding fathers would be very disappointed. I know for a fact they would call the rioters traitors to the Constitution. Sam in Bakersfield, California. We'll hear next from Diane in New Enterprise, California. Go ahead. New Enterprise, Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I think that the founders would be horrified by the fusion between government and corporate interests, especially the way it's being used to silence the opposition of the oligarchy that's now being formed. So that's how I think about that. On the riots, the biggest difference I see between the riots at the Capitol and the riots over the summer were corporate funding mutant militias to attack fellow citizens. The rioters in the Capitol confronted leadership. And while I don't condone the breach of the Capitol, I do see the difference between attacking and destroying the lives of your fellow citizens while being funded by corporations and petitioning your government directly. Oh, also the other main difference, no fires, no looting, and no graffiti at the Capitol riot. So just a couple of thoughts there. Thanks.
Oh, there was plenty of vandalism there, Diane. There were fire extinguishers used. There was all sorts of explosions of fireworks in the Capitol. So there was plenty of damage and 5 deaths resulting from the attack on the Capitol. Spokane, Washington. James is on the independent line.
Yeah, I think the elephant in the room and what's missing from the conversation is its demographics. It's really pretty simple. I mean, there's more people, there's automation, there's less jobs, people getting disenfranchised, credit cards going up, house payments are going up, and there's more people, and the more people that are disenfranchised, that's the unrest. It's the lack of upward mobility that is driving these people to do what they do, and they can take extreme beliefs or believe whatever they want to believe. But if you get down to the root of the problem, it's that people are being disenfranchised. There's no economic security. They're looking and wanting and needing more, and there's no outlet for them, and that's going to have gigantic spin-offs. And until that gets fixed, until the social structure gets fixed, and I mean, there's a common, I don't know what you want to call it, respect, courtesy, it's not going to get any better. And then, and in all honesty, I'm not an anti-Trumper, but I think he's been a disaster. I mean, just fomenting, violence and just anti-civil discourse is horrible.
Appreciate that, James. This is from The Hill this morning on this Martin Luther King Day. The headline: Biden calls Americans to volunteer on MLK Jr. Day. The president-elect urging Americans to give back on Monday by making a National Day of Service a key part of his inauguration week. Biden's inaugural committee is urging Americans to participate in volunteer opportunities that are virtual or with, quote, very limited in-person components. In Grand Marais, Minnesota, here's Tina on the independent line.
Hello.
Hi there.
Thank you very much for taking my call. I think, if anything, the founders would be absolutely disgusted by the way we have destroyed the planet. The unending wars, the destruction that we've caused everywhere, including within our own country. Thank you.
That's Tina in Minnesota. It's been mentioned since the attack on January 6th that the last time the U.S. Capitol was invaded was in 1814, toward the end of the War of 1812, by British troops, and the burning of the Capitol and of the White House. Here's part of our Capitol documentary that addresses that.
With a very inferior force, they swept the Americans aside, came to Washington, seized it, and burned every public building but one. And they burned the Capitol, they burned the White House. And they didn't burn the one place where they were told records were kept, and that was the Patent Office.
Clearly, the nation suffered a humiliating blow when the British burned the Capitol and the White House. Congress came back shortly after the British left. They convened in temporary quarters on F Street. One of the first things they debated was whether or not to keep the capital city on the Potomac. There were some very, very bitter feelings about the city. It seemed that some held it as a failed experiment, a rather silly thing to do, to create a new city just for the federal government. That did not hold up against those who reminded their colleagues that the city was founded by George Washington. George Washington's name was evoked time and again to great effect. It was his city. He laid the cornerstone of the Capitol. He selected the designs. We have no choice but to rebuild here on the Potomac. And in order to honor Washington, one must repair the public buildings on their original sites according to their original designs. And of course, that's what they did. With the
Part of our Capitol documentary re-airing today at 1 p.m. and 8 p.m. A couple of more calls here. St. Paul, Minnesota. This is our Democrats line. Les, welcome.
Hi, how are you? Happy Martin Luther King Day. I just want to point out that prior to Bacon's rebellion, most Americans were indentured servants, black and white. And our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, Constantine Volney, who wrote The Ruins of Nations, talked to Jefferson about his book where he pointed out that the Egyptians were black people and how we were suppressing black people. The United States wound up printing The Ruins of Nations, but they left out the part about black people. And most white people were grandfathered into the United States, just like Russia. I mean, most whites weren't free of Russia until 1862, and indentured servitude petered out at about 1830. So we're drinking the Kool-Aid of propaganda in this country. Now, when we talk about black, not just Egypt, when Giovanni Verrazzano, an Italian, traveled up the coast of the Atlantic from New York down to Florida, he was saying those people look like Ethiopians, you know? And
all right, to Abby in Riva, Maryland, Republican line, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN, and thank you for taking my call. I just want to point out the irony that the so-called slaves, I mean they were slaves, who built the Capitol were building their freedom, because in the Capitol is where the legislation took place to free them. To me, it's also symbolic that that building has lasted. Their work was almost lasted perpetually. To me, it's very symbolic of the slaves in Egypt who built the pyramids.
All right, to Connor, Studio City, California, Independent line.
Hi, thank you so much. I want to say James loved that, and 2 calls ago, good information. But I think we very much are kind of allowing the government to kind of get us hung up fighting amongst one another when, like, really, it's extremely simple what's going on. It's like there's not enough to go around, and there's not that holds true for power, that holds true for like just people being heard, that holds true for money, food, everything. And it's they have us just fighting amongst ourselves. And like there are things that every single person who's been on today I agree with, like Jim from Ipswich, New York. Like, yeah, we have had a mass industrialization, like fleeing of corporations from the United States. And that's
I'll let you go there, Connor. And just a reminder on our documentary, The Capitol. Again, it's airing today at 1 p.m. Also tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN. More ahead here on Washington Journal in this week of presidential transition with the impeachment on Wednesday. 2 guests joining us to discuss topics related to it. First, we'll hear from the nation's Elie Mystal, and later another perspective from the National Review's Ramesh Ponnuru. All ahead here on Washington Journal.
Wednesday, Joe Biden will be sworn in as the 46th president of the United States in our nation's capital. And in light of the attack on the Capitol and the temporary closing of the National Mall, the traditional inauguration ceremony has been modified. Follow our live coverage as the day unfolds, starting at 7 a.m. Eastern. Watch the arrivals at the Capitol, the swearing in of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and the inaugural address. The inauguration of Joe Biden, beginning at 7 a.m. Eastern Wednesday. Live coverage on C-SPAN and cspan.org, or listen live on the C-SPAN radio app.
On Tuesday, a day before the inauguration, watch confirmation hearings for 2 incoming Biden administration nominees. At 10 a.m. Eastern, the Senate Finance Committee hearing for Janet Yellen to be Secretary of the Treasury. Janet Yellen previously served as chair of the Federal Reserve. And at 3 p.m. Eastern, the Senate Armed Services Committee confirmation hearing for Lloyd Austin to be Defense Secretary. If confirmed, retired 4-star General Austin will be the first African-American Secretary of Defense. Watch live coverage of the confirmation hearings on C-SPAN, on demand at cspan.org, or listen on the C-SPAN radio app.
Tonight on The Communicators, we'll talk about what lies ahead for the tech and telecommunications industries in 2021 and potential issues under the Biden administration with Washington, D.C.-based tech reporters Emily Birnbaum of Protocol, Leah Nyland of Politico, and Chris Mills-Rodrigo of The Hill.
I think it would be safe to assume that there's going to be some sort of change to Section 230. I don't think any of these sort of sweeping changes that President Trump or even Joe Biden during the campaign, sort of this idea of repealing the law entirely is likely.
Democrats are concerned that Section 230 enables tech companies to look the other way while, incitements to violence, misinformation spread on their platforms. Obviously, given the events of the other week, the violence on Capitol Hill, those conversations aren't going away.
Tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern on The Communicators on C-SPAN 2.
Washington Journal continues.
Joining us next is Elie Mystal, Justice Correspondent for The Nation magazine, on with us to talk about the incoming Biden administration and the progressives, potentially the role of progressives, or certainly the progressive viewpoint. Elie Mystal, welcome to Washington Journal.
Thanks so much for having me, Bill. Happy Martin Luther King Day.
And the same to you as well. President-elect Joe Biden said in the last couple of weeks that after he was elected that he would be the president of all Americans. In the wake of what's happened in the past 2 weeks, 12 days, how does he go about doing that?
It's obviously difficult, right? Not all Americans want him to be president, and some are willing to resist that violently, apparently. So he's got his work cut out for him. I think that the way he will try to be the unifier, is by passing broadly popular legislation. Let's remember, and I try to remind people of this throughout the Trump era, that while Trump was a unusual, uniquely dangerous narcissist in chief, he governed like a fairly standard hard-right Republican, right? His policies were fairly standard hard-right Republican policies. And the thing that we have to remember is that those policies are broadly unpopular, right? It's broadly unpopular to not give people health care, especially during the pandemic, right? It's broadly unpopular to make tax cuts at the very top for the very wealthy and provide no relief to the middle class and the working class people, right? So I think when Biden says he's going to be the president for everybody, part of what he must mean is that he is going to pass legislation and enact laws that are broadly more popular than what we have seen previously. And hopefully that will bring some people who are skeptical about his administration onto his side.
The potentially skeptical progressives then, and not just those on Capitol Hill, the Bernie Sanders, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes of the world. How does the Biden administration include them, both physically? Are there people in his cabinet, for example, who are known progressives, and in terms of his policies?
Yeah, well, the fun thing about being progressive is that we don't have to be kind of invited to the table. We are at the table. And so we will, people like that will advocate for their positions. I don't, the difficulty here, and I hate to have this, I hate when people set it up as this battle between moderates and we broadly want the same things, right? We broadly want a more free and fair and equitable society. That is if the left is unified around those goals, right? We broadly want more healthcare and more safety. We broadly want everybody to get through this pandemic alive. Like these are big tent ideas, right? The disagreements are how we get there and how quickly and aggressively we move to get there, right? Biden is a slower horse in the race. He is the slow and steady turtle. I tend to favor policies that are a little bit more fast and aggressive and hard hitting. But that's a conflict, and I'm not saying that it's not. But we need to stop acting like this is the battle of the Titans. It's a question of how quickly can we do the things that we all agree need to be done. And I think that's the push-pull of this administration.
What about the voice of the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris?
It seems like she is going to have a major role in this administration in terms of not just out front. I mean, she's already been as out front as any vice president in the past. She also seems to have his people. I imagine she's not going to win all the battles. I imagine more broadly, we will not know which battles she won or not. But she's going to be a voice. She's going to be a voice in his ear the entire time, and I am hopeful about that. I think that's generally a good thing. Well, look, one thing that we saw from Biden, and I think this is true even during the campaign, the man does listen. The man can be moved. I mean, he is not a person who is afraid to evolve, to change his mind. Sometimes that's not great, Sometimes he changes his mind, I think perhaps in the wrong way, but he's willing to listen to people, and he's willing to be moved by compelling argument and compelling facts. And that alone is such a departure from what we had for the past 4 or 5 years. Like I'm almost excited about the fact, excited for the opportunity to yell at Biden, right? Like that's actually like, well, he'll be somebody that you can yell at, and he might listen to you if you have a good argument. That's different and new, and so at least compared to recent history. So I think that is kind of the role Vice President Harris will have. One of those forces trying to pull Biden, perhaps in a more progressive, perhaps in a more aggressive direction.
Your phone calls and comments welcome for our guest, Elie Mystal, who's a justice correspondent at The Nation magazine. 202-748-8000 for Democrats. Republicans, it's 202-748-8001. Independents and others, 202-748-8002. And to give some viewers and listeners more of an idea of where our guest stands on issues, one of your latest articles, Elie Mystal from The Nation, the headline, "There Can Be No Unity with Seditious Republicans." You write in this article that unity is the word that white people use when they want to accommodate and appease the forces of white supremacy. It's what anti-slavery whites in the North compromise and unite with rapists and murderers who held human beings as farm animals in order to have a constitution. It's what made Abraham Lincoln, the so-called great emancipator, offer, quote, charity instead of malice to the violent insurrectionists he'd just beaten. It's the word white people invoked when they advocated the imprisonment of outside agitators like Martin Luther King and John Lewis during the civil rights era. Unity is what oppressors always call for when they seek amnesty for their actions. And your comment, and I'll just say this for our radio listeners, F unity. The calls for unity from House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Senator Marco Rubio, and any number of Republicans who have enabled and emboldened Donald Trump for years are nothing more than a veiled threat, accept the violence already committed or risk additional violence against you. Any additional thoughts on that, Elie Mystal?
No, I think I wrote that just about right. Look, if you can tell that the people calling for unity are full of it because they never do it when Black people are accused of crime, right? You never see them call for unity after when a Black person is accused of crime that they've caught. Instead, they call for the harshest possible punishments, right? You didn't see these people call for unity after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, did you? Right? That was a perfect opportunity where the majority of the country said that we should wait until the next presidential administration, that she was such an important justice, that her death was so untimely and unfortunate, that we should unify, move toward, and have this election that had already started. Where were their calls for unity then? Oh, they don't have them. they had an opportunity to win and they pushed their advantage. That's what Republicans do all the time. So in this time, after they have done screwed up, after they have incited a riot, after some of them have made seditious comments, now they want us to not prosecute them, to not hold them accountable for what they've done, for some false calls of unity. Nah, that's not what we should do.
We have calls waiting, but let me show you the comments of Josh Hawley following the mob violence. We showed a photo of Senator Hawley there out greeting protesters with his raised fists in a notable photograph. But he had said after the attack that mob violence is always wrong, but democratic debate is not mob violence. It is, in fact, how we avoid that violence. Debate on the floor of Congress, like the debate that is provided for during the counting of electoral votes, is one of these. It is a forum for registering disagreement, airing different views, and resolving these differences peaceably. This is our proud tradition as Americans. Your thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, that is intellectually dishonest. He wasn't airing a different view. He was arguing for the overthrow of an election by throwing out black votes. That's not one option among many. All right, that's not tiny American flags for some, abortions for others. That's not where it is. All right, there were people in 1863 that had a different view about whether or not black people should have rights. That wasn't a debate. That was a war. What Josh Hawley did was give credence to the lie that started the riot. The lie was that the election was somehow stolen or manipulated. Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and 147 other Republicans gave aid and comfort to that lie. And that is why we had a mini insurrection on our shores against our capital on January 6th.
And I don't know
what's the accountability for that? Now, I'm not saying that's a jailable offense. There is First Amendment.
Maybe they need to be dismissed from Congress.
In jail.
Dismiss them.
There should be some professional accountability.
Send them back to their states.
Well, along those lines, let me play for you the comments of the incoming White House Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, who over the weekend in comments about the invitations to the inauguration Wednesday was asked about the whether or not certain Republicans would be invited, including Senator Ted Cruz. Here's what he had to say.
Jake, the invitations to members of Congress come from the Joint Committee of the Congress that runs the inauguration. I believe all members are invited, and I don't know who's specifically planning on attending or not. But look, I think what's more important than which members of Congress attend is what message Joe Biden will have for the country on January 20th. And that's going to be a message of moving this country forward. It's a message of unity. It's a message of getting things done. That's what he'll be talking about January 20th. And as you noted at the outset of this, he's going to come back to the White House after giving that speech at the Capitol and take some immediate actions to start to move this country forward.
I guess the question is whether or not President-elect Biden is being naive. I mean, if he's out there, he's giving the oath of office, his hands up, and he looks out in the audience and he sees Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and Mo Brooks and Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise and a bunch of these people whose actions, whose lies about the election led to the loss of life. These are the people you're going to be trying to work with.
No, those are the people he's going to hold accountable.
Well, Jake, what I will say is this. 93 senators in both parties, obviously, voted to confirm the electoral results on January 6th. Senator Mitch McConnell, a very conservative Republican, stood in the well of the Senate and made it clear that Joe Biden had won and that he opposed these efforts to overthrow the results of the people.
Melanie Mistol, I guess I ask you, which viewpoint do you side with in that conversation with Jake Tapper on State of the Union?
Yeah, I've never been for normalizing these Republicans. I've never thought that was a good idea. I've never thought that treating them like it's all okay is the right way forward. So I tend to agree with Jake Tapper in that conversation that even having these people like Ted Cruz, like Josh Hawley at the inauguration gives them an imprimatur of legitimacy that they no longer deserve. And so I wouldn't have them there. But again, I'm not trying to run, the entire country for 320 million people. Biden is Biden is trying to, as he keeps saying, be the president for everybody. He does see himself as a unifier. He thinks that's the way to go. The man won. Man won the election. He won the primary. Like, so you got to give him some. You got to give him some runway to do what he thinks is right, and hope that he turns out to be right about those things. I will say though that my issue with the inauguration, I can't even get to the Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley problem with the inauguration, because I am so worried about the actual physical safety of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Nancy Pelosi. We have armed insurrectionists who just stormed the Capitol, who have promised to come back with more guns and finish the job. We have a failure of law enforcement, where we have so many people within the law enforcement community who are complicit with these insurrectionists. We saw at the Capitol that while we had a few heroes, we also had a few sympathizers. I don't know who to trust. I don't know who the administration should trust. We have a Secret Service agent currently being investigated for supporting the protesters and the insurrectionists on January 6th. It just seems to me that we are at a time in our country where the continuity of American government suggests that we should not have the president and the vice president and the Speaker of the House all in the same place at the same time. We don't let these people fly on planes together for fear that bad weather will decapitate our government. Like, it just, the inauguration, the open air public inauguration where they're all three of them in the same place alone seems too dangerous, much beyond having to deal with Hawley and Cruz.
You can read our guest's article this past week on that. The headline on the piece is, "I no longer trust law enforcement to keep Biden and Harris safe on Inauguration Day." Calls for Elie Mystal with The Nation. We go first to our Democrats line in Capitol Heights, Maryland. David, good morning.
Oh, good morning. I just want to make a comment on the founding fathers. Is that okay?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, I believe that the founding fathers, themselves, wanted to address the issue on slavery. I believe that they was doing it because other nations of the world was banning slavery at that time. So what they did, they said, no, well, we can't come to a conclusion. We'll pass it on to our kids, our future children. And they settled the dispute 89 years later after the Civil War. So thanks for taking my comment.
Elie Mystal, we're spending the first hour asking our viewers about what would the founders think of today. So that's why that call. But I guess your thoughts on what he had to say.
Hey, look, first of all, I always like what would the founders think? The founders were here today, and the first thing they say is, what the heck is up in the air? That flies? What, like, they're old, right? Like, it was a long time ago. I don't think that their views are all that relevant to our modern society, but anyway. No, clearly they were pro-slavery. They wrote a constitution that was pro-slavery. They put in their document that some people were only 3/5 people. These were slavers and colonists. They were not great men. They were not. They had a great idea, but they were not good guys. That's the founders. What they would think about Trump? I mean, they literally warned us about factions and demagoguery in the Federalist Papers, right? So, like the actual. So, if you think of the Constitution as a product, the Federalist Papers were the advertisement for that product, and in the advertisement brochure, Hamilton, Madison, and Jay wrote a lot about how partisanship, factionalization could lead to a demagogue in the office of the president, which would be bad for the country, and that's exactly what Donald Trump is. So, yeah, they saw Trump coming a mile away. They didn't necessarily see Barack Obama coming a mile away, which is why they're bad people.
Here's Peter in Negaunee, Michigan, Republican line. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. You know, I know there's a delay between what I'm seeing and what you're seeing on there. But anyway, thanks for taking my call. And, you know, all of us, we're 99%. We're all together in this earth together. This is Martin Luther King's Day for love and peace. And that's what this world really needs, is to know why Martin Luther King was on this earth. And you know what Martin Luther King's real legacy should be? Is that he brought the country back and had brought the people that are supposed to be running this country and ahead of the government. The people are supposed to be giving the government, they're supposed to be giving them work, as far as what the problems are. And instead, it's the government running people. This democracy is not made for government running people. People are supposed to run the democracies. And I don't know how our Constitution and Bill of Rights and everything got all balled up, but that's what the problem is with this world right now. The 1% has corrupted Washington, and that's where our biggest problem is. We have to get the 1% out of Washington. And what I'm talking about with this 1%, I know I'm a little upset, but this 1% has the police included with them, and they're the ones that kill your black children. That's why they don't come home at night. That's all I have to say. If we take the guns from the police, your children will come home tonight. Thank you.
Peter in Michigan, any thoughts, Ellie Mistel?
Yeah, I think that I'm happy to eat the rich along with the next guy. The thing that King wanted most was justice. The thing that he wanted most was fairness. And he was willing to use any means he could to get towards justice and fairness. He believed in nonviolence. He believed in it as a tactic. He believed that nonviolent agitation was the quickest and most effective tactic to get towards justice and fairness, which is why in his own time, lots of people hated him. He was not popular in lots of places in this country because he was viewed as an agitator. He was viewed as somebody who wouldn't wait, who blasted the urgent need for justice and fairness and would not wait his turn. That's the legacy of Martin Luther King. And so as we sit here on the cusp of a new administration that promises to change our situation and to bring us away from the darkness of the past 4 years, I would just remind people that urgency is Martin Luther King's legacy. Urgency, not complacency.
Next is Randy in Pell City, Alabama. Good morning.
Yes. First thing off, you need somebody that ain't as racist as your man that's on there now. And yes, I am a Democrat. But the Democrats have run this country in the last 16 years to where it's not fit to live in. There's going to be more riots in the streets. And as long as you have somebody like this man that's on your show now, you're going to really have riots because he is a racist human being, just like Don Lemon and a lot of the rest of them in the media.
Why do you say our guest is a racist, Randy?
Because you can listen to the way the man talks. He don't talk about nothing but dividing the country, not healing the country. And as long as we got people like that in the country, we're going to have another civil war.
I'll let our guest respond if you choose to, Ellie Mistel.
Does that man think that justice is divisive? Does that man think that fairness is divisive? Because if he doesn't think that justice and fairness is divisive, then he should have no problem with me. Because what I want for this country, for myself and my children, and yours and your children, is justice and fairness. You give me that, we got no problems. That man doesn't like me because he understands that justice and fairness would make, what did he say, the country not fit for people like him to live in.
Maria's next up, Atlanta, Georgia, on the Democrats line.
Good morning to all.
Good morning.
Yes, I have a question and I have a comment. First of all, I'm so frustrated with the country, I don't even vote anymore. America's not the greatest country. It's proved that the way they treat people, $600 and all that stuff, no health care, no free coverage. You can go to other countries to get this. But I have a question for the guest. Do he believe that in the first start of getting things together with people is to shred that Constitution that their forefathers wrote? I quote, their forefathers wrote. Because I personally believe that's the start of it. You can't have that in here in this day and time. And that's what I feel. I'd like to hear his response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, please vote. Please, it's all we've got. Voting is all we have, and I know it's not enough. Voting is not enough, but it is the start. So please vote. Read the Constitution. Look, I believe that the Constitution is a racist document. I believe that it was written It was written at a time when the people were racist. It was written to support a white supremacist state. And it's structurally still that document. Now, it has been updated. I tend to think, and this is my view, not everybody agrees with me, not everybody on my side of the aisle agrees. I tend to think that the 14th Amendment, with its guarantee of equal protection and substantive due process for all, is enough that if applied to the rest of the document to save the Constitution from its original sins, to redeem the Constitution from the racism and bigotry and sexism of its founding. I believe that the 14th Amendment, 13th, 15th, 19th, they're a couple, but really fundamentally the 14th Amendment does the work if we simply apply it. So my fight, my struggle, my battle is always against conservatives who tell me that the 14th Amendment should be limited, cabled, and basically put in one section of the Constitution and not read to redeem the entire mess of it, right? Like that to me is the fundament. That is why I fight so hard against people like Amy Coney Barrett or Neil Gorsuch, or some of these Republican jurists that they put on our federal courts, because they don't believe that the 14th Amendment is allowed to fix everything. I believe that the 14th Amendment is allowed to fix everything.
I do too.
If you don't believe that, if you don't think the 14th Amendment is allowed to fix everything, then you at least I would end up where the caller was and say, well, the Constitution is wrong, we should start over. Let's remember, and I know this is but let's remember what happened in South Africa, right, after apartheid. In South Africa after apartheid, they didn't just like put some ornaments on their constitution and be like, all right, we're good now. No, they started over in a constitutional convention that this time included all of the people in South Africa, white, black, and other. They took 2 years and they wrote a new constitution. That constitution, the South African constitution, is actually right now, for my money, the best written constitution in the world because it was made by an inclusive body. Our Constitution was made by only rich white men. After the Civil War, the amendments were made by only rich white men, and I think that's a fundamental flaw if we do not apply the cures available to it.
Do you support at all this movement on the conservative side to call a convention of the states? They call it. Is that a solution at all?
That's a tough one. It depends on how you would call the delegates, right? If you call the delegates based on our inherently racist structures, equal representation for land as opposed to people, for instance, then no, a new constitutional convention would result in the same kind of failures of our previous constitutional convention. If you called a truly inclusive constitutional convention, if you called a convention where you had equal diverse representation of all the different peoples and genders and races in this country and put them together and gave them kind of free reign to do what they needed to do to make things right, I'd probably be more, I'd at least like to see what they came up with. I'd at least like to have a chance to vote to ratify on what they came up with.
Our guest is a graduate of Harvard with a degree, a BA in political science and government, and his law degree from Harvard as well. Next up is Robert in Greenville, North Carolina. Independent line.
Yes, we have a racist Republican Party. Donald Trump should go to jail. He's lied about even the vaccine now, the second shots. They're missing. They're not they're not where they're supposed to be. He's done nothing but disgrace the country, and his family also should be locked up. And the Republican Party needs to regroup or get out of politics because they're ruining the country.
Boom. The Republican Party has allowed itself to be captured by this man, right? And it's been, you've seen it happen. You've seen it happen to people like Ted Cruz, who, when he was running against Donald Trump, was able to tell the truth about Donald Trump. but now has been fully captured to the point where he supports insurrection to keep Donald Trump in power. Not because he wants Donald Trump in power, but because he wants the people who support Donald Trump to support him one day. It's sad is not exactly the word that I would use, because I've been trying to tell people that this is who Republicans are my entire life. So for me, it's a little bit more, I told you so. But it's clarifying that how desperate some of these people are for power, that they will literally say anything in service to a man who they know is wrong, in service to a man who they know does not share their ideals. They will say anything for more power, and that is scary. What they've allowed themselves to become.
There is a new congresswoman from Missouri, Cori Bush, who, after the election, the electoral college count, called for made a motion to proposed a resolution to expel Republican members who voted against those electors being counted. What are your thoughts on that?
Love me some Cori Bush, and I come down on the side of yes, those members should be expelled. Now it's a close thing. I mean, I don't want to pretend like it's not a close thing. There is voting for evil and committing evil are two different things, and we have to somehow keep in our heads straight that there are, degrees and levels here. And so I would worry strongly about a world in which congressmen are kicked out of Congress, congresspeople are kicked out of Congress because of how they voted. That's a very dangerous road to go down. However, it is also, as we've seen, very dangerous to try to convince people that the foundational structure of American democracy is flawed, corrupt, and manipulated based on no evidence, right? These people have spent 2 months lying to the American public about the state of its own election, lying, full face, with no evidence about the election. They spent 2 months doing that. Then they voted to continue doing that, again, based on no evidence, because they thought they could impress Trump's most rabid supporters. That lie, that 2-month fundamental lie, led to a revolt at the Capitol where 5 people died. There's got to be some accountability for that. There's got to be some accountability for that. And so that's why I support Cori Bush's resolution with the understanding that it would take a lot for me to support such a resolution, because fundamentally, I think that Congress people should get to vote however they want to vote about whatever they want to vote, and have that vote be reported and used against them in elections as opposed to through expulsion. So I think would have to be a very, very rare punishment. But in this case, they lied for 2 months and people died. What's the solution for that?
Let's go to Richard in Louisville, Kentucky, Republican line. Good morning.
I was a sophomore at a school in the west end of Louisville named Flagey High School when Martin Luther King was assassinated in Tennessee. It was an all-boys school. Our school was integrated, and one of my friends was a kid named A.J. Bullock, African-American young man, and we always laughed at A.J. He was the best-dressed guy in school, and I mean, he was sharp. But we always debated. We always argued, and of course, being a young white boy, I didn't have all the answers and everything, and I did see see some things through his eyes, and then I thought, them killing Martin Luther King after hearing his "I Have a Dream" speech, just how crazy has this world gone? But I ask you, sir, aren't you glad that Tim Cook, Twitter, Facebook, and all these other companies weren't there then to silence Dr. Martin Luther King, that he was able to speak his mind so that we in this country can understand the plight of what's going on? Thank you very much.
So I think that was a backhanded, because Martin Luther King would have been silenced in his own time, we have to let insurrectionists and violent threats proliferate online without control. I think that was the point there. And look, it's not a terrible point. Right? It's not a terrible point. I believe in the First Amendment exactly because I know that if I didn't believe in the First Amendment, the first thing that would happen would be a white government would silence me, right? Like so I appreciate the point, backhanded though it may have been. The difference, of course, is that the First Amendment is supposed to protect us from the government. Right? So in New York Times v. Sullivan, this is a case where somebody was printed, where it was literally a civil rights case, right? The government cannot tell the private press what it can and cannot print. That is the protection that the First Amendment contemplates. Private actors obviously have a right to print or not print, to voice or not voice, to give thought or not give thought to whatever they like. That's freedom, baby. And so the thought that the First Amendment, which is so vital to protecting us from government control, which I absolutely believe in, and absolutely the caller is right. If the government if there wasn't a First Amendment, the government would silence people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Al Sharpton and me and Michael Harriot. Like, obviously, the First Amendment is important to stop the government from doing something. But the private companies, the tech companies, no. They're the ones who are supposed to get to make these decisions. And the way that we keep them from silencing, voices that we like is to vote with our feet. Right? It's to vote with our feet. The reason why Twitter won't kick Black people off is because Black people bring the culture to Twitter. Right? That's a business decision Twitter's making. All these Republicans have spent most of their lives telling me that we should let the market decide things, right? Like, I'm the progressive. I'm the one that doesn't think we should let the market decide who gets healthcare. I'm the one who thinks we shouldn't let the market decide who gets housing. Republicans think that they should. Republicans think that the market can tell me if I get healthcare, if I get a good job, if I have a good house, if I have mice in the market can decide all that for me. But now the market is saying we don't want racist insurrectionists, and Republicans are like, I think that's bad. Nah, the market is deciding on this speech, and that is okay. The government cannot decide on speech, and that is critical.
Headline from Reuters: Twitter locks account of Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican who promoted QAnon. On Sunday, they locked the account of Representative Greene, a political newcomer known for promoting the baseless QAnon conspiracy theory. We hear from Joyce Lynn in Woodbridge, Virginia, Independent Line.
Yes, hi. My name is Joyce Lynn. The thing that I'm concerned about, the thing that I want to say is that I think the nation should repent. That's the first thing, because we've sinned against God and we've sinned against each other. We need to meet in the middle road, the Democrats and the Republicans, and we need to make information truth. We shouldn't have two different types of information going out there, and because that has been the reason why we have all of this upheaval in the country. I think the media should check before they put news out. Make sure it's truth. Don't just put something out there because it's going to sell more newspapers. Make sure it's truth. One more thing I'd like to say. When I was a child, I remember watching the cowboy shows, and they tried to be so fair. If somebody did not have a gun, someone with a gun would not shoot a person that was unarmed. Somebody that had a gun would not shoot someone in the back. All these were considered cowardly behaviors. Now we have allowed all of this to go on, and when the police shoot a Black person in the back, nobody says, "Oh no, this is unfair," because we have decided that lies makes more sense for us than truth. So that's my comment. I hope we will try to embrace truth in the future.
Okay.
I'm all for truth. Truth is great. to go back to the previous caller though, this is the limits though, right? The government cannot be in the business of determining what is truth. It just can't be. And the reason why it can't be is because too often it will determine it wrong. I mean, that's just frankly the reality. Too often the government will determine what is truth wrong. So we can't allow the government to come in and say, you can publish this, you can't publish that. You can say this, and you can't say that. That's not the proper role of the government. I know that because they will abuse their power. It is the proper role of private industry. So when she says, the media should check to make sure things are true, obviously, I think they should do that. Obviously, I think that most media does do that. The issue is that some media doesn't, and that media happens to be popular with a particular brand of white supremacists. That's the actual problem.
Let me ask you about your work ahead at the Nation. Just in looking and covering the incoming Biden administration, the upcoming Biden administration, does it get easier for you to address difficult issues, having an administration that you obviously would agree more with than the outgoing Trump administration?
I'm looking forward, Bill, to the Biden administration. I am looking forward to yelling at the Biden administration. I mean that gleefully and honestly. There are issues that I want to fight about that have nothing to do with should we have a country, right? Like I've had to spend, how much time I have to spend over the past 4 years fighting over that stupid wall that was never going to get built anyway, that was always a bad idea, that was never going to happen. How much time, how much ink I've had to waste explaining to people why the wall is illegal, why it won't happen, why it's not a national emergency. None of that. I don't have to do any of that anymore. I can fight about like actual issues, like should the minimum wage be $20 as opposed to 15? Like the things that I actually care about are now finally back on the table with the Biden administration. And of course, I'm not going to agree with the Biden administration about many of those things where I'm going to be on their left. I am looking forward to that fight, to being angry and arguing for a better future, as opposed to be in a constant defensive crouch, just trying to stop Trump and his Republicans from hurting people. So no, I'm looking easier. It's going to be more easy. It's going to be more fun once Biden is for a critic like me. I'm totally looking forward to it.
A couple of comments for you on Twitter. This one saying not all of the founders were pro-slavery. Adams and Hamilton come to mind. They wanted to keep the 13 states together, and the South was pro-slavery, so they compromised. Not a good compromise, but it was what they could get. Your thoughts?
Couldn't have made me compromise. Couldn't have made me compromise, right? Like, I'm so anti-slavery that I wouldn't compromise with slavers. So, yeah, sure. Adams, Hamilton, some anti-slavery Northerners really thought slavery was a bad idea. They thought it was such a bad idea, they wouldn't put the word slavery in their constitution because it was icky. You know what was more icky? Keeping people as slaves. That was what was more icky. That was the fight they should have had. They should have had the Civil War in 1787 if they were so anti-slavery.
Also, question from you on text, Tom from Bridgeport, Connecticut, asking about the Supreme Court. I've seen Mr. Mistol talk about packing the Supreme Court to counter the rightward direction of the last few appointments. Can you ask him to talk about this a little? Specifically, does he think it's possible? What will be the effect?
Yeah, so I was really into court expansion before the election when I thought there was a real chance that we could win the Senate by a comfortable margin. At a 50-50 Senate, just in a political reality situation, I am less confident that we can get a real court expansion package through. I am broadly confident that there will be some reforms. I talked about court expansion as but one of many reforms to go along with term limits, to go along with ethics reforms. I think we can get some of that. And depending on how the court shakes out, I do think there's still a chance that we could expand the court going forward in a way that in a way that would be more diverse. And again, one of my core arguments for court reform is not a revenge court reform. It's not a like, we're in charge now, so 10 justices of Democrats. Like, I can envision a world where we split the judges between the parties, right? And so maybe a more reform-minded court expansion plan isn't DOA in this closely divided Senate, but given the close divisions of the Senate, I think it's going to be even more tough than I thought it was going to be before the election.
Elie Mystal, Justice Correspondent for The Nation. You can read his commentary, his writing at thenation.com. Great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Bill. Happy Martin Luther King Day.
And more ahead here on Washington Journal. Up next, we'll look ahead with another viewpoint from the National Review's Ramesh Ponnuru, all coming up in your calls and comments as well as Washington Journal continues.